A gay billionaire's life changes after he met with a mysterious black woman. This is a story about the price of secrets and the terrifying realization that money can buy silence, but it cannot buy safety. We are about to dive into the world of Jack Valmont, a man who stands on top of the world, only to realize the ground is crumbling beneath him. Hello, my beautiful dreamers and thrill seekers. It is so good to have you here with me today. I want to send a warm hug to every single one of you. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your flag in the comments. And before we plunge into this storm, I have to ask, how are you really doing? If you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button and join our family. We are building something special here, and I don't want you to miss a single twist. Now, take a deep breath. Rain didn't just fall on the glass walls of the penthouse, it assaulted them. 80 stories above the shimmering, indifferent grid of New York City, Jack Valmont stood with his forehead pressed against the cold pane, his breath fogging the view of the empire he owned. The silence in the room was deafening, louder than the thunder rattling the steel bones of the skyscraper. In his trembling hand, Jack clutched a single, glossy photograph. It wasn't a picture of a scandalous business deal or a hidden bank account. It was far worse. It was a picture of him, 10 years younger, his face unguarded and soft, laughing in a sun-drenched park. And he wasn't alone. His arm was draped around a man whose face had been burned out of the photo with a cigarette lighter, leaving a jagged, charred void where a smile used to be. The message scrawled on the back in red ink was simple, "I know what you buried." Jack's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was the CEO of Valmont Industries, a man who moved markets with a whisper, a man whose homosexuality was known but whose history was a heavily guarded fortress. He had spent millions scrubbing his past, erasing the tragic summer that had nearly destroyed him. Beep. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. Jack spun around, dropping the photo. The biometric security panel by the private elevator, a system designed by military contractors, a system that required a retinal scan and a voice print, turned from an angry red to a welcoming green. The elevator doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Jack didn't move. He couldn't. He reached for the heavy crystal decanter on the bar cart, his knuckles white, prepared to swing. "Security," he shouted, though he knew the voice command would be useless if the system had been breached. "Get in here." Silence. From the shadows of the elevator car, a figure stepped out. She moved with a fluidity that suggested she was walking on water rather than marble. She was a black woman of striking, terrifying beauty. Her skin was deep umber, glowing under the recessed lighting, and she wore a tailored white trench coat that was completely dry, despite the storm raging outside. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun, exposing a neck that held her head high with regal defiance. She wasn't security. She wasn't an assassin. She looked like a ghost. "Put the decanter down, Jack," she said. Her voice was low, smoky, and possessed a texture that vibrated in the air. She didn't shout, she didn't have to. She spoke with the authority of someone who owned the building, not the man who held the deed. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, though his voice cracked. "How did you get up here?" "The codes." "The codes were written by a boy in devastating debt," she interrupted, taking a slow step forward. She glanced around the minimalist, sterile luxury of the penthouse with a look of mild distaste. "You really have built a lovely cage for yourself." "I'm calling the police," Jack threatened, reaching for his phone on the granite island. "You could," she said, stopping 10 feet away from him. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and uncomfortably perceptive. But then the police would see the photo on the floor. And once they run the DNA from the charred edge, well, the stock price of Valmont Industries wouldn't survive the morning. Jack froze. His hand hovered over the phone. "What do you want?" "Money? I can transfer $5 million to any offshore account right now. Just leave." The woman laughed, a soft, mirthless sound. "I don't want your money, Jack. I have plenty of my own." She reached into her coat pocket. Jack flinched, bracing for a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small, velvet jewelry box. She tossed it through the air. It arced perfectly, landing on the table in front of him with a heavy thud. "Open it," she commanded. Jack stared at her, his chest heaving. The fear was turning into something else, confusion, and a biting curiosity that he couldn't suppress. He slowly reached out and flipped the lid of the box. Inside sat a platinum ring. A simple band, dented and scratched, with an inscription on the inner curve. Jack gasped, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. He knew this ring. He had thrown it into the Atlantic Ocean 10 years ago. He had watched it sink. "How?" Jack whispered, looking up at her with wide, watery eyes. "He's dead. Ennis is dead. I saw the car burn." The woman stepped into the light, her expression shifting from cold authority to grim seriousness. "My name is Cassie Mertert. And I'm here to tell you that you didn't see what you thought you saw." She walked right up to him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of ozone and jasmine on her skin. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that sent a chill down his spine. "Ennis isn't dead, Jack. But the people who tried to kill him 10 years ago? They just found out he survived. And now, they know about you." Thunder cracked outside, shaking the floor beneath them. "Whatever you think you know about that night," Cassie said, her eyes locking onto his, "is a lie designed to keep you quiet. You have two choices, Mr. Valmont. You can call security, throw me out, and be dead by sunrise. Or you can come with me, right now, and finish what you started." Jack looked at the ring, then at the woman who had broken into his fortress without leaving a footprint. The fear of death was there, yes, but it was dwarfed by the sudden, violent spark of hope, a hope he thought he had buried in a coffin 10 years ago. "Where is he?" Jack asked, his voice barely audible. Cassie turned back toward the elevator, the doors sliding open as if anticipating her movement. She looked back over her shoulder, her silhouette framed by the steel interior. "If you want to know," she said, "you'll have to leave the checkbook behind." The private elevator descended 80 floors in under a minute, a smooth, gravity-defying drop that usually made Jack feel powerful. Tonight, it felt like falling. Jack Valmont stood in the corner of the steel box, gripping the brass railing. He was dressed in a three-piece charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, but he felt naked. Beside him, Cassie Mertert watched the floor numbers tick down with bored indifference. She had pocketed the ring, but its phantom weight still pressed against Jack's chest. He studied her reflection in the polished metal doors. She was a paradox, elegant yet dangerous, refined yet carrying the unmistakable tension of a soldier in hostile territory. "You're not just a messenger," Jack said, breaking the humming silence. "You moved through my security like it was wet paper. Who do you work for? The CIA? Private intelligence?" Cassie didn't look at him. "I work for the people who fall through the cracks, Jack. The ones men like you usually step over." The door slid open. Not to the lobby, with its marble floors and dozing concierge, but to the subterranean parking garage. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust, damp concrete, and shadows. "My driver is on the 3rd level," Jack said, reaching for his phone again. "I need to tell Lorene to cancel the Tokyo meeting." "No driver," Cassie said, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was iron. "And no Lorene." Jack stiffened at the mention of Lorene Caldwell. She wasn't just his COO, she was the architect of his public life, the woman who had sculpted his image from scandalous rich boy to untouchable titan of industry. Lorene knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, but even she didn't know about the ring. "If I go off the grid, Lorene will have the National Guard looking for me in an hour," Jack warned, pulling his arm back. "Lorene," Cassie said, her voice dropping to a hiss, "is the one who authorized the security update that let me in." The accusation hung in the damp air. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. Lorene? His oldest friend? The woman who had held his hand at his father's funeral? "You're lying," Jack spat, though a cold worm of doubt began to writhe in his gut. "Lorene is loyal." Loyalty has a price tag, Jack. You of all people should know that. Cassie nodded toward a battered, gray cargo van parked in a dark corner, tucked behind a concrete pillar. Your luxury sedan is a tracking device on wheels. If you want to live long enough to see Ennis, you get in the van. Jack looked at his phone. A text message from Lorene popped up on the screen. Where are you? The sensors show the penthouse is empty. Call me immediately. For the first time in a decade, Jack felt the crushing weight of the armor he wore. He was the gay billionaire, the headline, the success story. But beneath the silk ties and the board meetings, he was still the terrified 20-year-old boy standing by a burning car in the rain, screaming a name into the fire. His entire life since that night had been a performance, a penance for surviving when Ennis hadn't. If there was even a 1% chance Ennis was alive, the empire didn't matter. The reputation didn't matter. Jack powered off the phone. He dropped it onto the concrete floor and crushed it under the heel of his Italian loafer. Drive, Jack said. The inside of the van was stripped bare, no seats, just metal benches and equipment that looked illegal. A man sat in the driver's seat, hidden behind a mesh partition. We clear? The driver grunted. His voice was gravel over sandpaper. We're clear, Randall, Cassie said, sliding the side door shut with a heavy thunk. She gestured for Jack to sit on the bench. Jack, meet Randall Rose. He's the reason you're not currently being sniped from the rooftop across the street. Randall peeled out of the garage, the tire screeching. Jack grabbed a strap to steady himself as they merged aggressively into the rainy New York traffic. So, Jack said, his voice trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to curdle into anxiety. You said loyalty has a price. What's yours? Why save me? Cassie sat opposite him, her white trench coat glowing in the dim streetlights flashing past the windows. She looked tired now, the veneer of the invincible ghost slipping just enough to show a human woman underneath. Ennis saved my life in Sudan 4 years ago, Cassie said quietly. He took a bullet meant for me. I owe him. And he. She paused, looking at Jack with a mixture of pity and frustration. He never stopped talking about the boy who ran away. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. The boy who ran away. That was the truth of it, wasn't it? The media called it a tragedy. The police report called it an accident. But Jack knew. He had run. When the headlights had blinded them on that country road, when the other car had run them off the embankment. Jack had crawled out. He had heard the explosion. He had heard the sirens. And he had run into the woods, terrified of his father finding out, terrified of the shame, terrified of being outed. He had let the world believe he wasn't there. He had let Ennis die alone. Or so he thought. I didn't run because I didn't love him, Jack whispered, his eyes burning. I ran because I was weak. Weakness is a habit, Jack, Cassie said sharply. Tonight, you break it. The van swerved violently. Randall shouted from the front, we got company. Black SUV, no plates. They picked us up at the tunnel entrance. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. Who? The people who pay Lorene, Cassie said, pulling a Glock from a hidden holster beneath her coat. The sight of the gun in the hands of this elegant woman was jarring, a violent clash of aesthetics. She racked the slide. Get down on the floor, Jack. And stay down. I'm not hiding anymore, Jack said. The fear was there, massive and suffocating, but something else was rising to meet it, anger. Anger at 10 years of lies. Anger at Lorene. Anger at himself. I said get down. Cassie yelled as the back window of the van shattered. Crack. Glass sprayed over them like diamonds. The van fishtailed on the slick asphalt. Jack threw his arms over his head, but he didn't curl into a ball. Through the broken window, he saw the SUV gaining on them, headlights blinding in the rain. Randall slammed the brakes, sending the van into a controlled spin. Hold on. As the world spun, Jack realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about finding a lost love. This was a war. And for the first time in his life, Jack Valmont wasn't fighting with a checkbook. He was fighting for his life. But before we see if Jack survives this high-speed chase, I have a question for you guys. Have you ever trusted the wrong person? Has a friend ever betrayed you for money or status? It's a cold world out there. If you're enjoying this ride, make sure you're subscribed, because we are just getting started and I need you in my corner. The van slammed into a guardrail, metal screaming against metal, coming to a jarring halt. Out! Cassie screamed, kicking the back doors open. Move, Jack! They scrambled out into the rain. They were on the edge of the industrial district, a wasteland of abandoned warehouses and rusted shipping containers. The SUV screeched to a halt 20 yards away. 4 men in tactical gear spilled out. Run! Cassie commanded, firing 2 shots to provide cover. Jack ran. He ran in his expensive suit, his loafers slipping on the mud. He ran toward the dark maze of the shipping yards. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was the prey. But as he sprinted past a rusted red container, a hand reached out from the darkness and yanked him into the shadows. Jack prepared to fight, raising a fist, but the hand clamped over his mouth. Quiet, a voice whispered. A voice he hadn't heard in 10 years. A voice that haunted his dreams. Jack froze, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The man holding him was scarred, rugged, and dressed in rags, but the eyes were the same blue that Jack had fallen into a decade ago. It wasn't Ennis. It was Randall, who had circled back. No. The man released him. You shouldn't have come, Jack, the man said. It was a stranger. A rough-looking man with a jagged scar running down his cheek. Where is he? Jack gasped, looking around frantically. Cassie said. Cassie is buying us time, the stranger said, shoving a burner phone into Jack's chest. Ennis isn't here. This was a test. And you just failed it. What? Jack blinked, rain dripping from his nose. What do you mean? You led them right to us, the stranger spat. Lorene didn't betray you, Jack. She's the only one keeping Ennis alive. Cassie. Cassie is the one who sold you out. Jack's world tilted on its axis. He looked back toward the van. Cassie wasn't shooting at the men from the SUV. She was standing with them. She was handing them the gun. She was shaking hands with the leader. The realization hit Jack colder than the rain. The woman who had walked him out of his tower wasn't his savior. She was the delivery service. Run, the stranger urged, pushing Jack deeper into the maze of containers. If you want to explain to Ennis why you led a hit squad to his doorstep, you have to live through the night. Jack looked at Cassie one last time, watching the betrayal unfold in slow motion. He turned and ran into the dark, his heart breaking all over again. Rain plastered Jack's charcoal suit to his skin, turning the fine Italian wool into a heavy, freezing shroud. He scrambled over a chain-link fence, the rusted metal biting into his palms, tearing the skin. He didn't feel the pain. He only felt the burning in his lungs and the horrifying image of Cassie shaking hands with the men who wanted him dead. The stranger, whose name Jack still didn't know, moved with the silent efficiency of a predator. He vaulted the fence and landed in a crouch, signaling Jack to follow. They were deep in the Brooklyn Navy Yard now, a labyrinth of rotting industry and forgotten ghosts. Keep up, billionaire, the stranger growled, not looking back. Or stay here and die. Jack dropped from the fence, his ankles jarring on the concrete. Who are you? He wheezed, wiping mud from his eyes. Why did you say Lorene is innocent? Cassie had a good story, the stranger cut him off, dragging Jack behind a stack of wooden pallets. And you bought it because you wanted to believe you could just walk out of your tower and be a hero. Life isn't a fairy tale, Jack. My name is Jack, he snapped, a flash of his boardroom authority cutting through the panic. Stop calling me billionaire. And tell me your name. The stranger paused, looking Jack up and down with a critical eye. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and then left out in the weather. Sebastian. Sebastian Rose. Randall's brother. The driver? The dead driver, Sebastian corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. Cassie put a bullet in the back of his head before she got out of the van. I saw it from the scope. Jack felt sick. The driver, Randall, he had just been doing a job. Why? Jack whispered. What is the point of all this? If they wanted to kill me, they could have done it in the penthouse. They don't want to kill you yet, Sebastian said, checking the magazine of a heavy pistol he pulled from his waistband. They want the key. What key? The encryption key to Valmont Industries' cloud servers. Specifically, the Black Archive. Jack froze. The Black Archive wasn't a myth? It was a rumor in the tech world, a hidden server where Valmont Industries allegedly stored data that was too dangerous to exist. But Jack had never seen it. He didn't even know it was real. I don't have that key. I don't even know what you're talking about. Your father did, Sebastian said. And he left it to you. Or rather, he left it to the person he knew you'd trust most. Ennis, Jack breathed. Sebastian nodded. Ennis has the key. He doesn't know how to use it, but he has it. That's why they've been hunting him for 10 years. And that's why they needed you. Ennis has been off the grid, invisible. But he'll come out for you. They used you as bait to flush him out. A spotlight swept across the container yard, blindingly bright. The hum of a drone filled the air. They found us, Sebastian hissed. Move. They sprinted through the maze, the drone buzzing angrily above them like a mechanical hornet. Bullets began to chip at the concrete around their feet. Piff piff piff. Suppressed fire. Professional. In here. Sebastian kicked open the door of a rusted shipping container. Jack dived inside, landing hard on a pile of old canvas tarps. Sebastian followed, slamming the door and throwing the heavy latch. It was pitch black inside, smelling of mold and stale sea air. This is a dead end, Jack panicked, scrambling to his feet. We're trapped. No, Sebastian said, clicking on a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a hole cut into the floor of the container. Beneath it, dark water churned. We're leaving. You want me to jump into the East River? Jack looked at the hole, horrified. I'm wearing a $3,000 suit. You're wearing a Target, Sebastian corrected. He grabbed Jack by the lapels, pulling him close. For a second, the distance between them vanished. Jack could see the flecks of gold in Sebastian's hard eyes, feel the heat radiating off him. It was an intimacy born of danger, raw and electric. Listen to me, Sebastian said, his voice low and intense. Ennis is alive. He's in hiding in a place only I know. But if we don't get to him before Cassie's team tracks the GPS in your blood. GPS in my, what? Jack pulled away, horrified. That drink you had before Cassie showed up? The one you thought was just scotch? Jack remembered the glass on his desk. He had taken a sip right before the storm started. Lorene poured it. And Lorene laced it with a nano-tracker, Sebastian said. Cassie lied about Lorene betraying you to get you to trust her, but she told the truth about the tracker to get you to panic. It's complicated, Jack. Everyone is playing an angle. But right now, that tracker is broadcasting our location. How do we stop it? We can't stop it, Sebastian said, moving to the edge of the hole. We have to drown the signal. The salt water and the depth will scramble it long enough for us to get to the safe house. The drone banged against the roof of the container. Voices shouted outside. Time's up, Sebastian said. He didn't wait for Jack to agree. He grabbed Jack's arm and pulled. They plunged into the freezing, black water together. The shock was absolute. The cold was a physical assault, squeezing the air from Jack's lungs. He thrashed, panic seizing him, but Sebastian's grip was unyielding. He towed Jack down, deeper into the murky darkness, away from the surface where bullets were now slicing through the water like angry comets. They swam under the pier, the wooden pilings looming like underwater trees. Jack's lungs screamed for air. His vision began to spot. Just as he thought he would black out, Sebastian hauled him upward. They broke the surface under the rotting planks of an old dock, gasping for air in the small pocket of space between the water and the wood. "Quiet," Sebastian whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. Above them, boots thundered on the wood. "They went in the water," a voice said. It was Cassie. "Sweep the river. If they drown, fine. But I want the body. I need Valmont's retina to access the archive." Jack shivered, his teeth chattering violently. Sebastian pulled him close, wrapping his arms around Jack to share warmth, and perhaps to keep him from shaking apart. Jack buried his face in Sebastian's wet shirt, the smell of gunpowder and river water filling his nose. He was freezing, terrified, and hunted by a woman he thought was his savior. But as Sebastian held him, Jack felt a strange, confusing spark. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the magnetic pull of another man's strength. And then, a terrifying thought hit him. I am going to see Ennis. For 10 years, Jack had mourned a ghost. He had built a shrine in his heart to a dead boy. But now, faced with the reality of a living, breathing Ennis, Jack felt a surge of guilt. He wasn't the same boy Ennis had loved. He was Jack Valmont, the ruthlessly efficient CEO. He was damaged goods. "Sebastian," Jack whispered against the man's chest. "What is Ennis like now?" Sebastian stiffened. He hesitated for a long moment. "He's different," Sebastian said softly. "He's not the boy you remember, Jack. He's seen things. Done things. Does he hate me?" Sebastian looked down at Jack, his eyes unreadable in the gloom. "He thinks you abandoned him to die. Hate isn't strong enough for what he feels." The words cut deeper than the cold. Jack closed his eyes, tears mixing with the river water on his face. He had to fix this. He had to save Ennis, not just from the assassins, but from the hatred that had likely consumed him. "Let's go," Jack said, his voice hardening. "Take me to him." Sebastian nodded. He reached up and pulled a small, waterproof bag from a beam under the dock. Inside was a change of clothes, rough, nondescript workers' gear, and a set of keys. "Boat stashed 2 piers down," Sebastian said. "Welcome to the underground, Mr. Valmont." As they began to swim through the dark water toward their escape, Jack made a silent vow. He would survive this. He would find Ennis. And he would make them all pay, Cassie, the mysterious buyers, everyone who had turned his life into a game. But first, he had to survive the reunion with the man whose heart he had broken. The stolen fishing boat slammed against the chop of the Hudson River, every wave sending a jolt of pain through Jack's bruised ribs. He sat huddled in the small, oil-stained cabin, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that smelled of diesel and dead fish. The designer suit was gone, replaced by oversized gray coveralls that made him look like a child playing dress-up in a mechanic's garage. Sebastian stood at the wheel, his silhouette framed by the weak light of the instrument panel. He drove with aggressive precision, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. "You're bleeding," Jack said, his voice raspy. He nodded toward Sebastian's side, where a dark stain was spreading on his shirt. "I've had worse shaving," Sebastian grunted, not looking away from the river. "Drink this. It's cheap vodka. It'll thin your blood, mess with the tracker's pulse readings. Might buy us an extra hour before they pinpoint us." Jack took the dirty flask and swallowed a mouthful of fire. He coughed, the burn bringing tears to his eyes, but the warmth was welcome. He watched Sebastian, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his wet shirt clung to broad, corded muscle. Jack felt a traitorous flush of heat in his belly that had nothing to do with the vodka. He was on his way to find the love of his life, a man he had mourned for a decade, and yet he couldn't stop staring at the stranger who had dragged him out of the river. "You said you know Ennis," Jack said, the alcohol loosening his tongue. "You said he's seen things. What has he been doing for 10 years, Sebastian? While I was playing CEO, what was he doing? Sebastian tightened his grip on the wheel until his knuckles popped. Surviving. He worked oil rigs in the North Sea. Ran guns in Sudan. He did whatever kept him moving, whatever kept him off the grid. He became a ghost. And you? Jack asked, standing up and moving closer, swaying with the boat. Where do you fit in? You're not just a hired gun. You talk about him like. Jack hesitated. Like you own a piece of him. Sebastian turned then, abandoning the wheel for a second to lock eyes with Jack. The cabin was small, the air thick with tension and humidity. They were inches apart. Ennis pulled me out of a hole in Yemen 3 years ago, Sebastian said, his voice low and rough. I was being tortured. He didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. He saved me because he said he knew what it was like to be left behind. Jack flinched as if slapped. He talks about you, Jack, Sebastian continued, stepping into Jack's personal space. The intimidation was gone, replaced by a raw, simmering frustration. When he gets drunk? When the nightmares start? It's your name he screams. Not his mother's. Not God's. Yours. Jack felt the breath leave his lungs. I never stopped loving him. Love, Sebastian scoffed, looking at Jack's mouth, then snapping his eyes back up. Love is easy when you're in a penthouse looking at old photos. Love is a lot harder when you're bleeding out in a ditch. We'll see how much you love him when you see what he's become. The boat engine sputtered, then died. Silence crashed down on them. The only sound was the water lapping against the hull and the distant hum of the city they had left behind. Why did we stop? Jack asked, panic rising again. We didn't stop, Sebastian said, hitting the starter. Nothing. Kill switch. They jammed the electronics remotely. He grabbed a flare gun from the dashboard and kicked open the cabin door. They're here. Jack followed him out onto the small deck. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy mist on the water. Out of the fog, lights materialized. 2 sleek speedboats, flanking them on either side. Get down! Sebastian roared, tackling Jack to the deck just as a spotlight blinded them. Sebastian rose, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. It wasn't Cassie. It was a male voice, synthesized and distorted. Surrender the package, and you can walk away. We only want Valmont. Jack lay pressed against the cold fiberglass, Sebastian's heavy weight covering him. He could feel Sebastian's heart hammering against his back. They're not going to let me walk away, Sebastian whispered into Jack's ear. And I'm not going to let them take you. Why? Jack whispered back, his hand gripping Sebastian's forearm. You think I'm a coward? You think I ruined Ennis's life? Why die for me? Sebastian looked down at him, and for a fleeting second, the hard mask slipped. There was a flash of something vulnerable, loneliness, maybe? Or a recognition of a kindred spirit in the wreckage. Because Ennis isn't the only one who needs saving, Sebastian muttered. He rolled off Jack and fired the flare gun not into the sky, but directly at the fuel drums strapped to the back of the nearest speedboat. Whoosh! An explosion of orange fire lit up the night. The mercenaries on the boat screamed, diving into the water. The second boat swerved to avoid the debris. Jump! Sebastian yelled, dragging Jack to the edge. Again? Jack screamed. It's shallow here. The marsh. They jumped into the waist-deep mud and reeds of the Jersey swamplands. The water was thick, smelling of sulfur and decay. They slogged through the mire, the tall reeds cutting their faces. Behind them, the burning boat cast a hellish glow, illuminating the silhouette of the second pursuit boat turning to follow. They ran until Jack's legs felt like lead. They reached a cluster of rotting shacks raised on stilts, an old squatter's camp, long abandoned. Sebastian kicked a door in, shoving Jack inside. He slammed a heavy wooden bar across it. We're pinned down, Sebastian wheezed, sliding down the wall. He clutched his side. The bloodstain was larger now. Jack dropped to his knees beside him. "Let me see." "It's fine." "Let me see." Jack batted Sebastian's hands away and lifted the hem of the wet shirt. It wasn't a graze. It was a deep gash, ugly and jagged. "You need stitches," Jack said, his hands shaking. He looked around the filthy shack. I need a needle. Thread. Alcohol. "There's a kid in my boot," Sebastian groaned, his head lolling back. "Jack, if they come through that door, you use the gun." He fumbled for the pistol and tried to hand it to Jack. Jack stared at the weapon. It was heavy, cold, and alien. He was a man who signed mergers, not death warrants. But looking at Sebastian, this stranger who was bleeding out for him, something in Jack hardened. He took the gun. "No one is coming through that door," Jack said, his voice surprisingly steady. He found the kit. He poured the vodka over the wound, ignoring Sebastian's hiss of pain. He threaded the needle. "Talk to me," Jack commanded, his hands working with a dexterity he didn't know he possessed. "Keep yourself awake. Tell me about the Black Archive. Why do they need my retina?" Sebastian gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's not just data, Jack. The archive, it's a list. Every corrupt senator. Every bribed judge. Every laundered billion. Your father didn't just build a company. He built a leverage machine. He was the bank for the devil." Jack's stomach turned. His father, the philanthropist? The hero? And Ennis? Ennis stole the hard drive 10 years ago, Sebastian gasped. That's why they ran him off the road. He didn't know what it was. He just thought it was leverage to get your father to leave you two alone. He wanted to trade it for your freedom. Jack froze, the needle hovering over Sebastian's skin. The tears finally spilled over. Ennis hadn't died in an accident. He hadn't been careless. He had tried to buy their happiness by blackmailing the most dangerous man in the world. He had destroyed his life to save Jack. "He did it for me," Jack whispered, the realization crushing him. "Yeah," Sebastian murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. "He loved you that much." "Stupid bastard." Jack finished the stitch and tied it off. He bandaged the wound tight. "Sebastian?" Jack shook him. "Sebastian." Sebastian's eyes snapped open, glassy and feverish. "They're close. I can hear them." Outside, the squelch of boots in the mud. Jack stood up. He racked the slide of the pistol, just like he'd seen Cassie do. He wasn't the boy who ran away anymore. He stood in front of the injured mercenary, blocking the door with his body. "Let them come," Jack said into the darkness. But the knock that came wasn't a battering ram. It was a rhythmic, specific tap. 3 fast. 2 slow. 1 fast. Sebastian's eyes widened. He struggled to sit up. "Open it." "What? Are you crazy?" "Open it, Jack. It's the signal." Jack hesitated, his heart thudding against his ribs. He lowered the gun slightly and lifted the wooden bar. He pulled the door open a crack. Standing in the moonlight, covered in mud and looking like a creature born of the swamp, stood a figure. He wore a torn poncho, and his face was hidden by a hood. But Jack knew the posture. He knew the set of the shoulders. The figure pushed back the hood. Time stopped. The rain seemed to freeze in the air. The face was older. There were lines around the eyes that hadn't been there before. A thick beard covered the jawline Jack used to kiss. But the eyes, blue, haunted, and piercing, were the same. "Ennis," Jack breathed, the name leaving his lips like a prayer. Ennis didn't smile. He didn't cry. He looked past Jack, to the bleeding man on the floor. "You led them right to me," Ennis said. His voice was gravel, deeper than Jack remembered, and cold as the grave. He looked at Jack with an expression that wasn't love. It was pure, unadulterated disappointment. You should have stayed dead, Jack. The air in the shack was so thick with tension it felt combustible. Ennis moved past Jack, deliberately bumping his shoulder, and knelt beside Sebastian. He checked the stitches Jack had sewn with a critical, practiced eye. Sloppy, Ennis grunted, though his hands were gentle as he checked Sebastian's pulse. But he'll live. I didn't come here for a critique of my needlework, Jack said, his voice trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and heartbreak. He stood over Ennis, the gun still in his hand, though pointed at the floor. I came here because I thought you were dead. I mourned you for 10 years, Ennis. 10 years. And you stand there and tell me I should have stayed dead? Ennis stood up slowly. He towered over Jack, filling the small space with raw, masculine aggression. The scent of him, rain, old tobacco, and pine, hit Jack like a physical memory, dizzying and painful. You mourned a memory, Ennis spat, stepping closer until Jack had to crane his neck to look him in the eye. You mourned the boy who pumped gas and fixed your flat tire. You didn't mourn me. If you had, you wouldn't have believed the lie so easily. You wouldn't have let them erase me. My father showed me the body. Jack screamed, the tears finally spilling over. He showed me the DNA report. Your father, Ennis said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register, paid $3 million to a corrupt coroner to falsify that report. And then he told me that if I ever tried to contact you, if I ever tried to step foot in New York again, he'd have you arrested for the vehicular manslaughter of the drifter he put in that car to burn. Jack staggered back, hitting the wall. What? You heard me, Ennis said, his eyes blazing. I didn't run to save myself, Jack. I ran because your father held a gun to your head. He told me your freedom cost my life. So I paid it. The room spun. Jack felt the foundation of his entire existence crumble. His father, the benevolent titan, the man Jack had strived to emulate, was a monster. He hadn't just separated them, he had orchestrated a decade-long torture. Why tell me now? Jack whispered. Because the deal is off, Ennis said, turning away to start shoving equipment into a duffel bag. Your father is dead. But the people who took over his dirty work? They aren't interested in keeping you out of jail. They're interested in liquidation. Suddenly, a red laser dot danced across the wooden planks of the shack, settling on Jack's chest. Down. Ennis roared, tackling Jack. Boom. The wall of the shack disintegrated as a flashbang grenade detonated outside. Splinters rained down like shrapnel. The ringing in Jack's ears was deafening. Ennis was moving before the dust settled. He grabbed Jack by the collar and hauled him up. Can you move? I think so, Jack coughed. Grab Sebastian's other arm. We move on 3. They hauled the semi-conscious mercenary between them, kicking out the back rotted wall of the shack. They tumbled into the swampy darkness just as the front door was kicked in by the TAC team. Go. Go. Ennis commanded, dragging them through the muck. He knew this terrain. He moved through the reeds with an instinctual grace, leading them toward an old drainage pipe half buried in the mud. They slid inside the concrete tunnel, the water rising to their chests. It smelled of sewage and rot. They waited in silence for 10 minutes, putting distance between them and the kill squad, until they reached a dry junction room beneath the old industrial park. Ennis dropped Sebastian gently against the concrete wall, then turned on a battery-powered lantern. The harsh white light illuminated the grime on their faces. Jack slumped against the opposite wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was exhausted, freezing, and his world had been inverted. Ennis paced the small room like a caged tiger. Finally, he stopped and looked at Jack. The anger was still there, but beneath it, Jack saw the exhaustion. The toll of 10 years on the run. We can't run anymore, Ennis said. They have the perimeter locked down. Cassie isn't playing games. Who is she really working for? Jack asked, wiping mud from his cheek. If my father is dead, who wants the archive? Ennis walked over to his duffel bag and pulled out a ruggedized laptop. He flipped it open. "Come here." Jack crawled over. On the screen was a paused video file. It was grainy, surveillance footage from inside the Valmont boardroom. The timestamp was from yesterday. Jack gasped. On the screen, sitting at the head of the table, was Lorene Caldwell. Jack's COO. His best friend. But she wasn't alone. Sitting next to her, looking very much alive and comfortable, was the governor of New York. And across from them, was the head of the rival tech conglomerate, blowing smoke rings into the air. "It's a coup," Jack whispered, horror dawning on him. "It's not just a coup," Ennis corrected. He tapped a key, and audio began to play. Lorene's voice came through the speakers, crisp and cold. "Jack is the final loose end. His father encrypted the deepest level of the archive with a biometric lock that only Jack can open. But Jack doesn't know the password. Once we have his eyes, we bypass the password with the override key." "And the override key?" the governor asked. "The cowboy," Lorene said with a sneer. Ennis Del March. He was the old man's fail-safe. "We need them both in the same room. Kill the cowboy in front of Jack, and the trauma spike in Jack's biometric readings will trigger the emergency unlock protocol. It's designed to open under extreme duress." Jack stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. They didn't want Ennis for information. They didn't want Jack for his money. They wanted to torture Jack by killing Ennis in front of him. The key was Jack's grief. The system was designed to unlock only when the heir was watching his everything be destroyed, a twisted, sadistic final lesson from his father about the cost of power. "My father." Jack choked out, bile rising in his throat. "He built a lock made of my pain." Ennis closed the laptop with a snap. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Jack looked up at Ennis. For the first time, he saw the full weight of the burden Ennis had been carrying. Ennis had known this. He had stayed away not just to save Jack from prison, but to save Jack from this moment. From being the tool of his own destruction. "You knew," Jack whispered. "You knew that if we were ever together, it would kill us both." Ennis dropped to his knees in front of Jack. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, tragic sadness. He reached out, his rough, calloused hand hovering over Jack's face before finally, gently, cupping his cheek. "I tried to keep you away," Ennis rasped, his thumb brushing away a tear on Jack's dirty face. "I tried so hard, Jack. But you're stubborn." "I love you," Jack said, leaning into the touch he had starved for. "I don't care about the company. I don't care about the money. I just want you." "We don't get what we want," Ennis said, his voice breaking. "We get what we survive." He leaned in. Their foreheads touched. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was an intimacy deeper than skin. It was a shared breath in the dark, two broken halves of a whole finally clicking back together. "So what do we do?" Jack breathed, closing his eyes. Ennis pulled back, his blue eyes hardening into steel. The soldier was back. "They want a trauma spike?" Ennis said, standing up and checking the magazine of his rifle. "They want to see you break? Let's give them a show." "What do you mean?" Ennis looked at the unconscious Sebastian, then back at Jack. A dangerous, reckless smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Lorene thinks she's the player," Ennis said. "But she forgot one thing. I'm not just a cowboy anymore. I'm the one who knows where the bodies are buried because I'm the one who dug the graves." He offered a hand to Jack. "Get up, Jack. We're not running. We're going back to Valmont Tower. And we're going to burn it down with them inside." The return to Valmont Tower wasn't a triumphant march, it was a descent into the belly of a concrete beast. Using the schematic Sebastian had downloaded before the boat exploded, the trio, Jack, Ennis, and a limping, pale Sebastian, navigated the subterranean service tunnels that ran like arteries beneath Manhattan. The air grew stale and hot as they approached the foundation of the skyscraper. "This is it," Sebastian whispered, leaning heavily against a conduit pipe. He pointed to a heavy blast door marked high voltage, authorized personnel only. "Behind this is the cooling system for the server farm. We blow the coolant intake, the servers overheat, the emergency protocols kick in, and the biometric locks reset to default. It's the only way to bypass the trauma trigger." Jack looked at the door, then at Ennis. Ennis was checking his rifle, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked like a man marching to his own execution, and he was okay with it as long as he took the executioner with him. "You stay here," Ennis told Sebastian. "Rig the charges on the secondary line just in case." "I can fight," Sebastian argued, though he was sweating profusely. "You can bleed," Ennis corrected. "And right now, we need someone to keep the escape route open. If we aren't back in 20 minutes, you blow the tunnel and leave." "I'm not leaving you," Sebastian said. "You're not leaving him," Ennis said, nodding at Jack. "If I go down, you get Jack out. That's the job. Do you understand?" Sebastian held Ennis's gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. A silent transfer of duty. Ennis turned to Jack. The steel in his eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. He reached out and squeezed Jack's hand. "Stay behind me. Don't stop moving. Don't look at the cameras." "I'm with you," Jack whispered. "To the end." Ennis used a localized charge to blow the lock on the blast door. Thump. The door swung inward. They moved into the server cooling room. It was a cavernous space filled with the deafening roar of massive turbines and the blue glow of LED status lights. Steam hissed from overhead pipes. "The main intake is up there," Jack yelled over the noise, pointing to a catwalk suspended over the spinning turbines. They sprinted toward the stairs. The metal grate clanged under their boots. They were halfway up when the roar of the turbines suddenly cut out. The silence that followed was instant and terrifying. The blue lights turned to an angry, pulsing red. Clang clang clang. Heavy security shutters slammed down over every exit. "It's a trap," Ennis roared, spinning around, raising his rifle. From the shadows of the upper catwalk, slow, mocking applause echoed. Lorraine Caldwell stepped into the red light. She looked impeccable in a cream power suit, not a hair out of place, holding a flute of champagne as if she were hosting a gala, not an ambush. "Oh, Jack," Lorraine sighed, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "I expected better from you. The cooling system override? That's a vulnerability we patched in 2018. Did you really think you could sneak into your own building using a map from the previous administration?" "Lorraine!" Jack screamed, stepping out from behind Ennis. "Stop this. You have the company. You have the money. Just let us go." "I don't have the archive, Jack," Lorraine said, her voice hardening. "And without the archive, the governor gets nervous. And when the governor gets nervous, my stock options tank." She snapped her fingers. Floodlights blinded them from the ceiling. Jack shielded his eyes, but he heard the sickening sound of multiple weapons racking. "Drop the weapon, cowboy," Cassie Merturt's voice cut through the glare. Jack squinted. Cassie stood on the platform next to Lorraine, a sniper rifle trained directly on Jack's center mass. Below them, on the ground floor, a dozen tactical operatives emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Ennis didn't drop the rifle. He stood in front of Jack, a human shield. "You want him?" Ennis growled. "Come and get him." "I don't need to come get him," Lorraine said. "I just need you to die." Crack. A single shot rang out. It wasn't a warning shot. It took Ennis in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped to one knee, grunting in pain, but didn't let go of his weapon. "Ennis!" Jack lunged for him. "Don't!" Ennis gasped, shoving Jack back. "Stay down." "Next one goes through his knee," Cassie called out calmly. "Drop the gun." Ennis looked at Jack. Blood was already soaking his sleeve. He looked at the dozen barrels pointed at them. He looked at Cassie's scope. He knew the math. He couldn't win this. Slowly, agonizingly, Ennis placed the rifle on the metal grate. He raised his hands. "Smart boy," Lorene said. "Bring them up." 5 minutes later, Jack was shoved into a chair in the center of the server control room. It wasn't a normal chair. It was a medical device, with restraints for his wrists and head, and a complex array of sensors positioned in front of his eyes. Cassie strapped him in, tightening the leather cuffs until Jack's hands went numb. "You don't have to do this, Cassie," Jack pleaded, his voice cracking. "You saved me once." "Why?" "I didn't save you," Cassie whispered, not meeting his eyes. "I delivered you." "It's just business, Jack." Across the room, 2 guards held Ennis on his knees. He was bleeding, beaten, and breathing hard, but his head was high. Lorene walked over to the control console. "System ready," she announced. Biometric sensors are reading Jack's baseline. Heart rate is elevated. Cortisol is spiking. "We're close." She turned to Ennis. She walked over to him, her heels clicking on the floor. She pulled a heavy, silver revolver from her purse. The Black Archive requires a distress signal that matches the specific neural pattern of Jack Valmont experiencing catastrophic loss, Lorene explained, sounding like she was reading a quarterly report. "His father calibrated it to the day you died 10 years ago. To open the door, we have to recreate that day." "You're sick," Jack sobbed, thrashing against the restraints. "Lorene, please. Take my eyes. Cut them out. Just don't hurt him." "It doesn't work that way, sweetie," Lorene said, cocking the hammer of the revolver. She pressed the cold barrel against Ennis's forehead. "The machine needs to see you break." Ennis looked at Jack. His face was bruised, blood running into his eye, but he smiled. A sad, beautiful smile. "Jack," Ennis said, his voice steady. "No. No." Jack screamed, the sensors buzzing as they picked up his rising panic. "Look at me, Jack," Ennis commanded. "Don't look at her. Look at me." Jack focused on Ennis's blue eyes. The world narrowed down to just the 2 of them. "I love you," Ennis said clearly. "I loved you then. I love you now. I'll love you when I'm gone." "Don't say that." Jack wailed. "Ennis, please." Reading 98% threshold, a technician called out from the console. "Almost there. We need a spike." Lorene sighed. "Goodbye, cowboy." She shifted her aim. She didn't aim for the head. She aimed for the stomach. A gut shot. Slow. Painful. Agonizing to watch. "No." Jack screamed, the sound tearing his throat raw. Bang. The gun went off. Ennis jerked backward, collapsing onto the metal floor. A dark pool began to spread instantly beneath him. He gasped, curling in on himself, his eyes rolling back. "Ennis!" Jack's scream was primal, a sound of pure, shattered soul. Threshold reached, the technician shouted. 100%. The lock is disengaging. On the main screen, a massive progress bar turned green. Access granted. "It's open." Lorene cheered, clapping her hands. "Download the files. Everything. Move." Jack slumped in the chair, the fight draining out of him. He watched Ennis's body twitch on the floor, 10 feet away and an eternity out of reach. The light was fading from the cowboy's eyes. Jack had opened the door. But the cost was everything. The guards released the restraints, no longer caring about the broken man in the chair. Jack fell forward, crawling across the floor toward Ennis. He dragged himself through the blood, grabbing Ennis's hand. "Stay with me," Jack wept, pressing his forehead against Ennis's chest. "Please, God, stay with me." Ennis's breath was a wet rattle. He looked at Jack, his eyes unfocused. "Run," he whispered. "Jack, run." Then, Ennis went still. Jack Valmont lay on the cold floor of his own tower, holding the body of the only man he had ever loved, while around him, the vultures feasted on the secrets he had just unlocked. It was over. The bad guys had won. And Jack was left with nothing but ashes. Jack Valmont stared at the blood pooling around his knees. The world was a muted blur of grief, the only sound the triumphant beeping of the server console as it siphoned his father's secrets. "We have it!" Lorene shrieked, her composure cracking into manic greed. 90%. We own the Senate. We own everything. Jack looked down at Ennis. The cowboy's face was gray, his eyes closed. But then, Jack felt it. A faint, rhythmic flutter against his palm. Thump, thump. Ennis's hand, limp in Jack's grip, twitched. He wasn't dead. Not yet. A jolt of electricity shot through Jack's spine, hotter and sharper than the grief. Ennis was fighting to stay, which meant Jack had to fight to keep him. Jack raised his head. He looked at the massive screen above Lorene. Status, unlocked. Current user, Jack Valmont, administrator. Lorene was so focused on the data, she missed the detail. The system wasn't unlocked for her. It was unlocked for him. The biometrics were still active. The building was listening to Jack's heart, Jack's sweat, Jack's voice. Jack wiped the tears from his face with a bloody hand. He didn't stand up. He didn't scream. He just breathed, his heart rate slowing from panic to a cold, deadly rhythm. "Lorene," Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. Lorene spun around, confused. "What?" "Don't interrupt the..." "You forgot who built this place," Jack said, his eyes locking onto the camera lens on the console. "System." The computer's synthesized voice boomed, drowning out the hum of the servers. "Listening." Lorene froze. Cassie swung her rifle toward Jack. "Shut him up." "System," Jack commanded, his voice steady as stone. "Protocol, blackout." "Protocol blackout confirmed." Zap. The server lights died. The overhead floods blew out with a shower of sparks. The download bar on the screen vanished. The entire room was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Screams erupted from the tactical team. "I can't see. Night vision is washed out." "Cancel." Lorene screamed into the dark. "System, cancel." "Access denied," the computer replied coolly. "User unauthorized." In the pitch black, Jack leaned down to Ennis's ear. "I've got you, cowboy. I'm getting us out." "Jack." Ennis groaned, pain lacing his voice. "Quiet now," Jack whispered, feeling around the floor until his hand closed around the cold steel of the rifle Ennis had dropped earlier. He pulled it to his chest. He wasn't the billionaire in the suit anymore. He wasn't the victim. He was the administrator. And he was holding a gun in a dark room that he knew better than anyone. A heavy thud echoed from the blast door. Then another. Boom. The door blew inward, knocking two mercenaries flat. "Room clear," a gravelly voice shouted from the doorway. A flare sizzled across the floor, casting long, dancing shadows and revealing a figure standing in the smoke. It was Sebastian. And he wasn't alone. He was holding a detonator, and he looked very, very pissed off. "Sorry I'm late," Sebastian growled, racking his weapon. "Traffic was a bitch." Jack stood up in the flickering red light of the flare, the rifle heavy in his hands. He looked at Lorene, who was cowering behind the console, clutching her useless hard drive. "You wanted my father's legacy?" Jack said, stepping over the line of safety. "You're looking at it." He raised the rifle. "Get them," Jack commanded. The server room erupted into chaos. Sebastian moved like a phantom in the strobe light flickering of the flare, his suppressed pistol spitting fire. The mercenaries, blinded and confused by the blackout, were shooting at shadows. Sebastian dropped 3 of them before they even knew where to aim. Cassie murmured, realizing the tide had turned, swung her rifle toward Jack. You don't have the guts, Valmont. She was wrong. Jack didn't fire the rifle. He smashed the butt of it into the emergency fire suppression panel on the wall. Hiss. Halon gas flooded the room instantly, a thick white fog that sucked the oxygen from the air. Cassie coughed, her shot going wide, shattering a server rack. Sebastian emerged from the mist, sliding across the floor, and kicked the rifle from her hands. He leveled his pistol at her face. Stay down, Sebastian barked. Cassie froze, raising her hands in defeat. Jack walked through the fog, stepping over groaning mercenaries, until he loomed over Lorene. She was huddled under the console, clutching the external hard drive to her chest like a baby. I still have it. Lorene choked out, tears streaming down her face. The drive. It's encrypted. I can still sell it. Jack looked down at her with zero pity. He reached out and tapped the enter key on the console. Command accepted, the system voice droned. Initiating total system purge. Magnetizing drives. A low, powerful hum vibrated through the floor. No. Lorene shrieked as the hard drive in her hands began to heat up, the magnets wiping the data instantly. You're burning billions of dollars. You're burning your father's legacy. My father's legacy was poison, Jack said. And I'm the antidote. He turned his back on her screams. Jack dropped the rifle and fell to his knees beside Ennis. The cowboy was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes fluttered open as Jack touched his face. Did we win? Ennis whispered, blood bubbling on his lips. We won, Jack choked out. He slid his arms under Ennis, lifting the man with a strength born of pure desperation. Sebastian. Clear the hall. Way is clear. Sebastian shouted, shoving a handcuffed Cassie toward the wall. The NYPD is swarming the lobby. The blackout protocol auto-dialed 911. Jack carried Ennis out of the server room, stepping over the wreckage of his past. He walked through the smoke, his expensive shoes ruining in the blood and oil, carrying the only thing that had ever mattered. As they burst into the corridor, paramedics rushed forward. I've got him, Jack wept, refusing to let go until they forced him to. Save him. Save him and I'll buy the whole damn hospital. As they loaded Ennis onto the gurney, Jack collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. Sebastian sat next to him, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Hell of a board meeting, boss, Sebastian grunted. Jack looked at his bloody hands, then at the empty corridor where Lorene was being cuffed. He finally exhaled. 3 days later, the sunlight streaming into the private suite at Mount Sinai Hospital was so bright it felt like a different planet from the dark, wet hell of the server room. Jack Valmont sat in a stiff leather chair, watching the steady rise and fall of the chest beneath the white sheets. He had been scrubbed clean, shaved, and dressed in fresh clothes, but he hadn't slept. He couldn't close his eyes. He was afraid that if he blinked, the heart monitor beeping rhythmically in the corner would stop. You're staring again, a raspy voice croaked. Jack jumped, his heart stuttering. Ennis was looking at him. His blue eyes were tired and crinkled at the corners, but they were clear. The oxygen mask had been removed, leaving just a nasal cannula. I'm memorizing you, Jack whispered, leaning forward to grip Ennis's hand. In case you try to run off again. Ennis tried to laugh, but it turned into a wince as he clutched his bandaged abdomen. Run? Jack, I can't even pee without assistance. I'm not going anywhere. Good, Jack said, bringing Ennis's knuckles to his lips. Because I resigned. Ennis blinked. You what? I stepped down as CEO this morning, Jack said, a lightness in his voice that he hadn't felt in 20 years. The board is in chaos. The DOJ is tearing the company apart looking for the corruption my father hid. Lorene is singing like a bird to cut a plea deal. Valmont Industries is finished. And you're okay with that? Ennis asked, searching Jack's face. I kept the hospital wing, Jack smiled, gesturing to the room. and the Wyoming ranch. And enough money to make sure neither of us ever has to wear a suit again. The door pushed open, and Sebastian walked in. He was leaning on a cane, but he looked cleaner than Jack had ever seen him. He tossed a folded newspaper onto the bed. Front page, Sebastian grinned. The headline read, "Billionaire Whistleblower Exposes Empire of Corruption." Below it was a picture, not of Jack in a boardroom, but of Jack carrying Ennis out of the smoke. "They're calling you a hero, boss," Sebastian said. "And they're calling me your handsome, mysterious bodyguard. I might have to ask for a raise." "You're retired, Sebastian," Jack laughed. "We all are." "Retired sounds boring," Sebastian mused, stealing an apple from the fruit basket. "But the Wyoming ranch. I hear they need security. Lots of open space. Quiet." Ennis looked at Sebastian, then at Jack. The three of them had been forged in fire. They were survivors of a war no one else knew had happened. "There's a guest cabin," Ennis grumbled, though a smile tugged at his beard. "If you don't mind horses." "I hate horses," Sebastian said. "I'll take it." Jack stood up and leaned over the bed. He brushed a strand of hair off Ennis's forehead. The nightmare was over. The blackmail, the secrets, the years of longing, it was all ash in the wind. "We have a second chance, Ennis," Jack whispered. "A real one." Ennis reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and pulled Jack down. Their lips met, not in a desperate goodbye like in the swamp, but in a gentle, promising hello. It was the kiss they should have shared 10 years ago, sweet with the promise of a future. "I reckon we do, Jack," Ennis whispered against his lips. "I reckon we do." Outside, the city kept moving, loud and indifferent. But in that room, there was only peace. The gay billionaire and the cowboy who came back from the dead had finally found the one thing money couldn't buy. They found home. The end. And there it is, family. Love didn't just survive, it conquered. From the penthouse to the swamp, and finally to peace. Jack and Ennis got their happy ending, and they even kept Sebastian around for the ride. If this story took you on a roller coaster, please smash that like button and make sure you are subscribed. I have so many more twisted, romantic, thrilling stories coming your way, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Until next time, keep dreaming, stay safe, and never give up on a second chance.